Hello and welcome to the Minutes to Win It NBA podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Jason Gilbo at JGilbo11, talking about tonight's slate, and it's a really fun slate. Going to be a nice night for a bunch of GPPs and things like that. So, starting off with some injury concerns, of course, and there are plenty of them tonight. We'll go position by position. Chris Paul obviously ruled out for tonight once again. So we've got Austin Rivers, Jamal Crawford, whoever you want to play there. Probably Jamal Crawford is the guy that I much prefer to step up there against Minnesota. And also, of course, Blake Griffin as well. You're not necessarily chasing the 39 points from Jamal Crawford, but somewhere in between his production his last two games, the 23 and the 39 you got there in those two games. I mean, going to put up a ton of shots. Makes a really, really nice cash game play at 4,600 tonight.
Yeah, much better play on FanDuel there, where he's 4,600. He's 5,600, so he's got a little bit more price on DK, but still a great spot tonight. Should be a high-scoring game from both sides, and you got to look at Crawford as one of the higher usage players from the Clippers behind Griffin.
Yeah, and he's a safe bet for 30-plus, if not mid-30s in minutes there. Yeah. Other guys at point guard, we got Kemba Walker is listed as doubtful for tonight, so obviously unlikely to play, so that's going to bring up guys like Jeremy Lin, who has a nice cheap price tag on both sides. You don't love the matchup, like you and I were talking earlier. You mentioned how you don't love the matchup against Jackson. I don't either, but you figure he's going to get upper 20s, maybe even low 30s in minutes potentially in this one. At his price, mid 4Ks, I think he's a fine filler. Not a guy that I think has a ton of upside, but I think he's a fine cash game play. It should see around 30 minutes tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the matchup, but I mean, it's not a bad spot for Lin. He's still going to get his. I wouldn't expect the upside, but definitely a nice cash game filler.
Yeah. We've got Jared Bayless has no timetable to return. Grievous Vasquez is questionable once again. So once again, we've got Michael Carter-Williams, still pretty cheap, still very inconsistent. Last four games, 30, 30, 27, and 28 minutes. You imagine if this is a competitive game, you should see around 30 minutes. Decent price tag and not a bad matchup. I mean, Damian Lillard obviously much more athletic than he is, but he's not known as a good defender. Doesn't exert a lot of his energy on the defensive end. So I think that Carter Williams, still a GPP guy for me. There's way too many good cheap cash game options, but I think he's a guy you consider in your GPPs. Because at that price, he's got significant upside.
Yeah, I love his upside tonight. Like you said, I mean, the price is great. Going to get minutes unless Jason Kidd goes up and suits out there himself and plays and throws back the clock. But otherwise, he should get minutes. Probably still around the 30 range. I can't really see him unless he's really producing, be up any higher.
Yeah, and that'll be. I would be surprised Jason Kidd could put up 25 FanDuel points tonight if he played. But
he probably could.
Yeah. Either way, hopefully, well, he'd have to be sober, so I don't know if that's the case. But looking at the Mavericks, we got a couple guards there: Devin Harris, JJ Barea, of course, both doubtful to play. So that once again brings us to the value play of the week. I guess he is Raymond Felton. Last three games, 40, 34, and 38 minutes. Not a ton of production in those first two games, but last game, 31 FanDuel points, 11, 10, and 6. He's still not a guy that's going to, have 40-point upside, but it's $3,900 on FanDuel. Really nice value play that you can just kind of slot in there and know he's going to get mid-30s in minutes and just hope that some of his shots fall and he can get you your 25 fantasy points. Because, if we're talking about multiplier on salary, he could easily get you 7, 8x tonight.
Yeah, I think Felton might be the one guy who has the most upside out of that low range there, just because he's playing a lot more minutes and has a better matchup. Because I know we both like Corey Joseph as well as another cheap play. Still getting exposure to that awful defense for the Lakers, who rank in the bottom three against point guards. So if you don't like Lowry, you probably like Lowry, but you don't want to play him in maybe a possible blowout. Corey Joseph still pretty solid exposure for getting 28, 30 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a guy that I'll be slotting in there as well. Looking at shooting guards, there's not a whole lot of injury fallout. Of course, JJ Redick, Chris Paul, both those guys out. We already mentioned Jamal Crawford and his minutes there. Not a whole lot of other guys that are going to see bigger minutes based on injuries, but one guy's seen a bump in minutes. Alan Krabby, last couple games, 35, 25, 23. He's been seeing in mid-20s, so if you need a guy that's right around minimum salary to fill out a lineup, I think he's probably your best bet if we're talking absolute minimum type of guys.
Yeah, I like that. And they're, Portland guys, the beat writers have been talking about him stepping up into a little bit of a bigger role, kind of coming into his own. So, I mean, for bare minimum, I mean, shooting guard, always a great spot to go bare minimum at.
Yeah, and I mean, a couple other guys that are taking on bigger roles around there. Gerald Green with Luol Deng, unlikely to play once again. He's seen 28 and 26 minutes his last two games. Hasn't been very productive, honestly. 8.4 fantasy points against OKC, 20.1 against Cleveland. Very, very scoring-dependent player. So if his shot's not going down, he has a really low floor. I think you could do worse in cash games, but I mean, you could pay up not much more and get a guy like Jeremy Lamb, who is going to see minutes off the bench. Similar minutes, maybe a little bit less, probably mid-20s compared to Green, is going to see upper 20s. But with Kemba Walker doubtful, maybe he takes on a little bit big of a role. I'd rather pay a little bit more for a guy like him or Jamal Crawford or even Wesley Matthews.
Yeah, Matthews coming off his best game of the year, and he's a lock for easily 30-plus minutes. I mean, you know you're going to get minutes there. He's been playing around 35 in the last 5 games, and his shot hasn't been falling up until that last game. So hopefully he can build on that and really turn around and could make for a nice cheap play still until he takes a bump in salary.
Yeah, and I mean, confidence certainly riding high with him after knocking down 10 three-pointers in his last game. So one other guy that could have some injury fallout, and if John Wall, who's listed as questionable for tonight, for some reason he's not allowed to play, Brad Beal's minutes are kind of locked in anyway, 42, 38, 38, 41 recently, but you imagine there's going to be plenty more shots to go around for a guy like Brad Beal if John Wall can't suit up for tonight, but also going to be a potential blowout concern because we saw LeBron sat out for the Cavs, and you think Kevin Love, or I personally had extra Kevin Love thinking he'd step up, and that game was over in a hurry.
Yeah, another guy, Avery Bradley, listed as questionable, or game time decision with the illness there, and the only real beneficiary would be Evan Turner getting more run there, and he's a nice cheap play if Bradley does sit.
Yeah, absolutely. And then maybe that might bump up a guy like Tyreek Evans a little bit too, because obviously Bradley, nice defender, or one of the better perimeter defenders. So maybe give him a little bit bump, even though he's still locked right around 30 minutes right now. Small forward, not a whole lot to see here as far as injuries. Talked about Luol Deng there, of course, Gerald Green. Justice Winslow also going to see a little bit of a bump in minutes, assuming that he sits, which he should. But Justice Winslow only played 18 minutes last game. Obviously, it was a blowout, but even when he was getting minutes, he wasn't producing. 34, 29, 35, 29 in minutes, 14, 13, 20, and 13 in fantasy points. Just not a guy that I've played at all, and I don't imagine that's going to change tonight.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. It's probably a game I'm just going to avoid altogether, being slow-paced and not a ton of great options anyway.
No, not at all. And then elsewhere, I mean, you had, if we're talking about random big minutes, Wesley Johnson was a guy that just randomly came out. He had played 4, 5, and 9 minutes in his last 3 games, then played 36 against Orlando. So he's a guy that you could look at in your tournaments. I mean, we've seen him produce at times before when he played for the Lakers. Was a high-volume shooter type of guy, and the Clippers have really struggled on the wing. So maybe they finally found a guy that can actually produce there if they give him the opportunity. So his minutes kind of hard to predict for tonight, but obviously with Paul and Redick out, maybe he sees 20-some minutes tonight, but certainly a very, very low floor. So deep GPP only guy.
Yeah, I mean, you got to look at Clippers. Maybe Doc Rivers has just figured out Wesley Johnson is a better player than Lance Stevenson. I don't know. But this guy should be getting way more run with all the injuries in LA.
Yeah, someone needs to figure out that Lance Stevenson is not that good of a basketball player. But it seems like maybe he's on the right track there. Because Wesley Johnson, not a bad defender either. So, I mean, he's a guy that could at least fill in for you on the wing there, their biggest weakness. Elsewhere at small forward, Nick Batum, minutes-wise, not really going to change anything if Kemba Walker sits out, which he's likely to. But sees mid to upper 30s every game and is going to see some higher usage now if Kemba sits out. So, I mean, he's the guy that's just going to be locked into all of my lineups tonight.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's kind of a bummer. DK switched him over to shooting guard, where also Andrew Wiggins is also a shooting guard. So small forward's really weak on DK. It's Kawhi Leonard and basically not much else.
Yeah. It's so both, like you said, both those guys at shooting guard, both guys still small forward on FanDuel. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic between the two sites when you build your lineups tonight. Power forwards, as far as injuries and bigger minutes go, nothing as far as injuries that's significant. But one thing that we're looking at here, Markieff Morris did not play, coach's decision last game. We saw guys like John Lure get big run, 41 minutes in that game, 23 and 39 the games before that. He's producing. We're hearing that maybe it was a partial disciplinary thing for Markieff kind of losing his head, but also hearing that Potentially, Markieff could be on his way out, maybe to Houston, maybe involved with the Terrence Jones kind of deal. So, seems like he's certainly in the doghouse, and Markieff certainly got its hands off for me. But I'm still a little bit hesitant on John Lure in cash games unless we hear for sure that he's going to have that bigger role tonight.
Yeah, I mean, if Lure does, I'm all aboard. I think I like that a lot if you're trying to get in some bigger names, but I have had zero John Lure exposure over the last few days, and twice it's burned me, once it hasn't. So I'm probably just going to be avoiding that one anyway because the Suns' front court not that fun.
Yeah, and plenty of value across the board. So it's not, and there's not a whole lot of. I mean, there's no James Harden, there's no Steph Curry, Russell Westbrook that you're trying to pay for tonight. So really easy to get in any guy that you want with the value. So if there's a value play you don't feel great about, no reason to really force them in there. Yeah. Of course, a power forward. This isn't much of a minutes thing, but Anthony Davis playing huge minutes, of course. 46, obviously, in that overtime. Or, I'm sorry, against the Cleveland overtime game. 35, 41, 44. I mean, he's carrying the team on his back right now. And every game that he's played at least 30 minutes in over his last 10, he's scored at least 50 FanDuel points. Obviously, significantly higher. I'm sorry, at least 49. Significantly higher on DK. He's just a lock for a double-double. Back at home. Obviously, we know he gets some favorable stat corrections there with steals and blocks. So Anthony Davis is going to be the first person locked into my lineups tonight against Boston.
Oh, I'm definitely with you there. I mean, good team defense. We've been talking about it, but they're a little bit banged up. In the front court, not as good against point guards. But power forward is really where they struggle, especially kind of being an average rebounding team. And really, you got to look at who he's matched up against. Amir Johnson and Jared Sullinger. I mean. He should eat tonight.
Yeah, good luck with that. Center, there are quite a few injury concerns. Al Jefferson has been out, so that's not really news there. Marcin Gortat has been out for a couple games now, anticipating he'll be back Wednesday, so he's going to be out for tonight. Jonas Valanciunas out as well. Tyson Chandler was listed as doubtful this morning, but he's not expected to play tonight either, so the guys that are getting some bumps there, Bismack Biyombo, of course, another guy who's still been cheap, but last game saw just 14 minutes. His production, not a guy that ever really looks to score. He's kind of a rebound-only guy. With other better values, other places, he's not a guy I'm too excited about playing tonight. Of course, with Al Jefferson out, and he's not a good defender anyway, now you get Andre Drummond against whatever is left of that Charlotte front court, which is already not a very good front court. Yeah, I mean, Cody Zeller and company. Drummond coming off a 38 fantasy point game as far as FanDuel is concerned against the Lakers in 24 minutes. Andre Drummond, I mean, his upside is through the roof tonight.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I think the only other really cheap center is possibly Alex Len. I think, we've looked at his last couple of games and it's been really just depending on how teams go against them. Washington went very, very small, got into foul trouble against Drummond, had a decent game against Memphis in the last game, 12-7 in 32 minutes. So I think with Chicago's size, not a great defensive team down low anymore, so could be a nice cheap target.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one more guy that's questionable for tonight, Jahlil Okafor with the upper respiratory infection in a game that the Spurs are already supposed to win by about 1,000 points, actually 13.5 right now. But if Okafor doesn't play in this one, I mean, it's an easy game to just avoid because you just don't see any way where the Phillies, the Sixers keep this one close, even at home. I mean, this is a good game that I can just kind of pretend like isn't happening tonight and don't feel too bad about it.
Yeah, likely going to be a blowout. Okafor did torch him at the beginning of the season, but, you have to think questionable. Even if he plays, it's just too many other options around him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's going to wrap things up here for us for the Minutes to Win It podcast. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. We got lots of other NBA, NFL, and every other content at dailyfantasycafe.com.